Hi, this is Tim Freund with Dilbeck Estates and Christie's International Real Estate. And thank you so much for joining me today on my podcast for first-time homebuyers. This is the first installment, the first segment. And today I'm going to talk about money. The first step in purchasing a home is doing what? Saving money. Seems pretty obvious, but let me tell you what that money is going to be used for. Why do I need to save money? So most lenders are going to require a down payment. If you're a veteran, that's a little bit different, and I'll talk about that in a future segment regarding financing. But you need to put a down payment down. That down payment represents a portion of the purchase price. The balance above and beyond your portion is your loan amount. That's what you're borrowing to make up the difference to pay the seller to your agreed sales price. So I need money for down payment. You also need money for the earnest money deposit, or EMD. The deposit is required to have a valid contract. To have a valid contract, you must have consideration. Now, it could be a cow, it could be diamonds, it could be gold, but in today's day and age, it's cash. So you're going to make a deposit. I don't think they're going to take a cow for escrow. Well, maybe if it's a Wisconsin cow with the black and white. No. Anyway, so you're going to make a deposit with your earnest money, and typically in California that's 3%. So if I'm buying a $500,000 home, 3%, that's $15,000. I wire that money into an escrow account. What is escrow? We're going to come to that. So you've got your earnest money. You've got your down payment money. What else do you need cash for? I'm going to paint. I'm going to do improvements. Okay, maybe. That's helpful for sure, but the bank doesn't care about that. What the bank cares about is that you have enough money for your down payment, for your deposit, for your closing costs. What are closing costs? Okay, earlier I just mentioned escrow. Escrow in a California transaction is the center hub of a wheel. That includes your realtors, your lenders, home warranty, insurance, all of those different communications are going to go through the central hub of the wheel, and that's escrow. But escrow, of course, needs to be paid. And typically, escrow fees are a percentage of, or it's somehow related to the purchase price. So, for example, a typical escrow fee might be $200 base. So it starts off at $200. And then $2 per thousand based on the purchase price. So if I'm buying a $500,000 home, $2 per thousand is $1,000 plus $200. My escrow fees are $1,200. Make sense? Cool. Okay, so escrow is someone who gets fees. Another group that gets fees is the title insurance company. What is title insurance? Title is the ownership, the chain of ownership that shows that you actually own that piece of property. Title insurance is the company, the insurer, who gives you an insurance policy guaranteeing that you have title to this property, that somewhere back 3 transactions ago, someone's not going to step forward and say, wait a minute, we never actually conveyed that property. That was Grandpa's, and I never agreed, and I'm on title, and blah, blah, blah. You have insurance. Because can you imagine somebody stepping up at a later date and saying, hey, that's my property, and you've just spent, invested $100,000 in this property. So you have to have title insurance. You also will find that in California, the title insurance, they'll go all the way back to the Spanish land grants, back to La Cienega, who was a property owner, the King of Spain, gave property to, or whomever. So super important. Title insurance is a component, and they, like escrow, are based on the sales price. So you might end up with $1,200 or $1,400 in title insurance fees. These are called closing costs. Now, these specifically, escrow, title, these are non-recurring closing costs. What that means, non-recurring, means it doesn't occur over and over again. It just happens one time when you purchase the home. Non-recurring, sorry. And a lot of people will say non-reoccurring, but it's not really true. The phrase is non-recurring. Although I guess you could say non-reoccurring, but really it's non-recurring. So I digress. Anyway, so you've got these costs that only happen one time. Escrow, title, recording fees, transfer taxes sometimes have to be paid for by the buyer. So There's different fees that are negotiated oftentimes in the process of the transaction, but that are paid for by the buyer. Now, I've mentioned non-recurring. There are loan fees, which are also non-recurring. They only happen because you're getting a loan. Well, like what? Okay, well, how about like appraisal? If you have to have an appraisal on your property, of course you do. Why? Because the bank's not keeping that loan. They're going to sell it to somebody. If they're going to sell it, they're going to go, here's this loan for $400,000 on this $500,000 property. And the guy that's buying it goes, that's great, $400,000 note. Oh, wonderful. Well, how do I know the property is really worth $500,000? Well, because somebody had to do an appraisal. So the bank's going to require that, and guess who gets to pay for it? The buyer. That's right. It's a buyer benefit. Buyer gets to pay for it. Oh, and by the way, is it really a buyer benefit? No. It's actually for the benefit of the bank, right? Because the bank's the one who's selling your loan. You following me on this? They're going to sell your loan. They need the appraisal to sell it, right? To show that it's really worth the piece of property that's the collateral for the loan, that the property is really worth, the collateral is really worth what they're saying it is. So when an appraisal comes in at $500,000, yay for you. It came in at value. Guess what? They got a copy of the contract. So they knew exactly what the price was. What happens if it doesn't come in? What happens if it comes in low? We have a problem. We'll talk about that maybe in the future, but just know that the appraisal is for the benefit of the bank. It's not really telling you what the property is worth, although clearly when they tell you it's worth what you paid or even maybe worth more than what you paid, it sure feels good. But it is actually just one person's opinion, and it's for the benefit of the bank. That is a one-time fee with your loan, and you'll get an appraisal on every loan that you ever get for real estate. Another one-time fee would be a recording fee. You got to record the deed in, the ownership deed. You have to record the note that is the loan has to be recorded against that, lien against that piece of property. So those are one-time fees that you have to pay for. Excuse me. But hey, those are recurring. So those are non-recurring closing costs. So loan fees, appraisal, processing fees related to your loan, recording fees. A notary has to be brought in to sign you up. So a notary fee is a one-time fee. So you need cash for all that. And then there's something called recurring closing costs. So we have non-recurring, which are escrow, title, and then the loan fees, appraisal, processing fees, whatever, loan points, whatever else the lender might be charging. And then you have recurring closing costs. An example of recurring costs would be taxes, property taxes. So, for example, you closed May 5, and the property taxes that the owner paid for that given year were paid in April. So that means that you owe them for the balance of the taxes that they've already paid. That's called having to owe a prorated amount. It's prorated from the day you close to the end of that given tax cycle. In California, the tax year begins on July 1 and ends, the first half ends 12/31. The second half begins January 1 and ends June 30th. So if I closed in that example on May 5, then I end up owing till June 30th. You don't get that free, so they prorate that, and then they charge you through escrow, and that's a recurring cost because you're going to be paying taxes, forever on this property. Another example of a recurring cost is insurance. You have to have fire insurance on your property because the lender is going to require that. If your house burns down, the home is the collateral, that the bank has for your loan. If the house burns down, there better be insurance to pay to have it rebuilt because that's the collateral. So the lender is going to require fire insurance. Fire insurance may range anywhere from $700 to several $1,000s, depending. And of course, in some of the canyons, it can go into the tens and twenties of thousands of dollars. So it can be very expensive, but nonetheless, it's paid for out of your cash up front when you close. So as a first-time buyer, you got to prepare for this. You have additional costs. You have non-recurring costs, escrow title. You have non-recurring costs associated with the lender, appraisal, loan processing fees, and recording fees, and you have and then you have recurring costs, which are going to be insurance, taxes, homeowners dues. I paid on the 1st, you closed on the 5th, you owe me for 26 days in May, I paid the homeowners dues, you owe me back pay for that. That's called prorated. So those are all examples of needs for cash. What else? How about a thing called reserves? Now, you think about reserves, and you probably understand what that means. That's like cash held in reserve. It's held in the bank. It's my savings. My rainy day fund is important because if something happens, I'm going to need to rely on that cash. Well, a bank is going to want you to have that cash too for the same reason. They don't want you to have your car breakdown, and you have to decide between repairing your car and making your mortgage payment, and you can't get to work if you don't repair your car, so you repair your car and you don't make your mortgage payment. You have to have a little bit of cash in reserve. So there's another purpose for cash. Cash for down payment, cash for earnest money deposit, cash for closing costs, both non-recurring and recurring, and cash for reserves. You have to have all that. One thing I do want to mention, the broker commission fees are typically paid for by the seller. So you won't typically, as a buyer, have to pay broker commissions. Now, an office may have a $250 or $350 charge that they charge you for processing paperwork and legalities, make sure everything's up to snuff. The thing here is that I want to get across is that you, as the buyer, typically do not pay commissions. So the listing broker receives a commission from the seller, and then they in turn pay your representative, the selling broker, a commission. So you're not really responsible. Now, there are examples where you're at an auction and there's a buyer premium. You're buying a home at auction and they have a buyer premium. You see this like in art sales and stuff like that. The buyer premium might be 10% or whatever. But typically, commissions are paid for by the seller to their agent, who then in turn pays your agent. So you don't have commissions. So that really then circles back to a whole separate discussion on how do you choose your realtor and what are the advantages to one type of real estate brokerage and another. And I'll maybe touch on that in the future. But just know commissions are not your responsibility. So we've recapped basically everything there. You've got down payment, you've got deposit, you've got non-recurring closing costs, you've got recurring closing costs, and you have reserves. And you don't have to pay commissions. So that's pretty much what's required by way of cash. So the first thing you do as a potential buyer is you go ahead and get cash. Save your cash. Anyway, this is Tim Freund. That's segment 1 of first-time buyer program I'm running here on my podcast. You can find me on the web. You can DM me, thousandoaksrealestate.com, therealestateconversation.com. That's my blog, Instagram, Facebook, etc., LinkedIn. Make sure you reach out and give me your feedback. Feel free to subscribe if you like this. And make sure you look for episode 2 because I'm going to talk about financing.